What is going on, guys? Matt in the Hat, Matt Johnson with Keller Williams Diamond Partners. It has been a minute since I have got a chance to do this, and there's been some changes and some things happening over the uh, the last year, all of 2021. Obviously, those that pay attention to the channel know that I took 2021 off for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, my youngest son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes early on last year. With that large of a learning curve, it kind of took, I was fortunate and able to take some time off to spend with him to figure out what that means, what that's going to mean for him going forward, and what that is going to mean for us going forward as a family. So we have really, uh, you know, it's like drinking from a fire hose. So for anybody that doesn't know, type 1 diabetes, it's not something that's caused by your diet like type 2. It does require insulin in order to survive. He will never outgrow this. He is going to live with this for the rest of his life at this point in time. There's not really a cure that it can make it go away. On top of that, this was my most productive year in real estate, and I was fortunate enough to help 23 families last year uh, either find a new home, sell their current one, and either relocate or upgrade homes. And there was some policy changes that were thrown down from the powers that be, and trying to really get an idea of what those look like and what those changes mean. Took some time, took some homework, and some talking back and forth, not just with my broker, with the multiple listing service that I belong to, I'm a member of. So it took us a little while to hammer all of that out. So the hot list is going to look a little different going forward. So what does that mean? Well, I will be able to continue to answer your questions about real estate, any concerns about real estate, as well as any real estate topics. What I'm not going to be able to do is feature a property each day that I talk, and each day that I do this. I can talk about my own listings that I have and that might be coming up. Uh, I'm just not going to be able to talk about and feature other listings like I have in the past. So again, the hot list is now going to be geared more towards answering your questions, talking about real estate questions, concerns, and topics. So as we get into it, the question of the day: How does rent to own housing work? This question is pretty common in my world. I get this sometime at least once a week, if not twice a week. And a lot of that is because buying a home can be a big deal. And especially if you are a first time home buyer, or maybe for those who have had credit problems in the past. One of the most common ways to buy a home, as most of us know, is to get a mortgage or a home loan. Now, doing this requires both a credit score the lender is going to find acceptable, and having enough cash on hand for a down payment and other closing costs. Generally, what people run into, at least from my experience and what I've seen, are credit problems coming up from the past. You know, a couple skeletons that you might have forgot about in the past. Or I've also seen this as well. Maybe a buyer is unable to get cash together for a down payment and those closing costs. There are some other alternatives. One of the alternatives most people are familiar with is the rent to own or owner financing, as it's referred to. Now, this option um, for the would-be homeowner in this example, they would take possession of the house as a renter before the purchase of the home is actually finalized. So this isn't always an option available for everyone. We are going to cover some details about how the rent to own works and what's involved with it. Before we get into this, this is just kind of a general list. This is not a deep dive. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail with this because I have I've done this a couple times, and it's not the most common one, like buying or selling a house outright would be. So this is not a, you know, entire list of anything that could happen or go on. We're just going to cover some general details. So there are 4 areas of the rent to own that you need to know about. Number one is going to be the basics. Uh, the basic idea behind a rent to own is pretty simple. Instead of buying the house outright, you rent the home from the current owner instead. So it's kind of like if you were continuing to be a renter instead of a buyer. And what that means is rent payments typically cover both the cost of the rent, or the rent that's due, rental, whatever you want to call it, as well as pay a portion towards the asking price of the home. Now, after the specific time has passed, whatever is agreed to in the contract, you either have to pay off the balance of the property, or what's most common is you'll have a final lump sum payment that's due at the end, and that finalizes the home purchase. Number two is going to be the rental contract. This is something that's generally entered into a lease with this type of agreement. Just a quick side note here, a lease for a rent to own is going to be different than a standard rental contract. I just want to make sure that I'm being clear. Those are 2 different things. If you have questions on that further, just shoot me a message. Most of the time, what happens is that the would-be buyer agrees to stay in the home for a longer period of time than what a standard lease would be, and you may have to initially agree upon some upfront payment that goes towards the cost of the house. That will also help bring the monthly cost down a little bit as well. Check your contract, because whatever you detail out, whatever you agree to, this is in the contract is actually going to state exactly how much the owner wants for the home, what percentage of the rent is going to go towards that amount, and this will also provide the information that you need about how buying the home, uh, when you're buying the home, when that lease ends, and you'll either have to have it paid off by then, or the lump. Sorry, I can't talk today. Mondays. Or when the lump sum payment is due. Number 3 is the option to buy. In most cases, your rent to own contract will feature an option to buy. This gives you the option to pay any remaining costs to finalize the home purchase once the lease ends. Depending on the wording of the contract, so make sure you're paying attention and you've read it. This may also have an option to pay off the balance early and finalize the purchase. Even if the lease isn't set to expire, you can still pay it off sooner without any type of penalty. I just want to reiterate again, make sure that you pay attention to the verbiage. You need to be careful when you're reading through this, and before you sign it, make sure that you're understanding. Read and pay attention to these details. Whether you need to get a title company or attorney involved, depending on where you live, make sure you get them involved and ask them any questions as well, because the lease option of the contract may give you an option to buy at the end of the lease. Some contracts will contain the lease purchase clause. what this basically states is you have a legal obligation to buy the property regardless of whether or not you can afford it. So make sure you're paying attention to that and know what you're getting into. And finally, I'm sure most of you were waiting to see where this was going to fall. Number 4, maintenance requirements. When renting in a typical rental or lease, maintenance and upkeep of the home is generally the responsibility of the landlord. Now, in a rent to own situation, the lease will typically specify that the homeowner is now responsible for some or all of the upkeep. So you, as the would be buyer, may be responsible instead of the seller. Now, what I've also seen is scenarios where the seller gradually shifts the responsibility over to you the longer you stay in the property. This is less common than other situations, but still need to be on the lookout. Again, pay attention to the contract. All the verbiage will be in there. Make sure that you understand it. And I bring this up because it's important to know from the start who's going to be responsible for things that come up before the lease expires, because depending on the terms, you may need to have something fixed yourself, hire somebody, or have the landlord do it, or bring them in to fix it as well. So that's it. Those are the 4 areas that you need to know about the rent to own and how it works. So again, just the first one is the basics of how much the rent payment is going to be, plus the cost of the home payment built into that as well, and it may require some payment up front. Number 2 is going to be the rental contract. It's going to be, this type of lease is going to be different than a standard rental lease or rental contract, so just be aware of that. Number 3, with the option to buy in the clause, see what it states, because if you're interested in the rent to own, you need to know that you're going to be able to afford this, because if it gives you an option to buy, there may be a lump sum, or it may be a high enough cost at the end you might not be able to afford it. So make sure that you can afford it. And finally, number 4, with the maintenance requirements. Again, with standard rentals, the landlord is in charge and responsible for maintenance and upkeep. Depending on the situation, what you agree to, and what the contract says, you could be responsible for it as the would-be homeowner. The landlord might be responsible for it, or the landlord will start, and by the end or the longer you stay in there, it will transition over to you as the would-be homeowner. So that is the topic that we got for today. Make sure that you keep those questions coming. Make sure, if you have any questions, you can shoot me a message on Facebook, Instagram. You can find me, you can drop it in the comments on YouTube. Wherever you're at, make sure that you just kind of let me know that you have a question or a topic that you'd like me to discuss about real estate. I am going to be back doing this. It is going to be, I'm going to be shooting for 12 o'clock Central Standard Time, Monday through Friday again, like I had been doing. I know I'm getting a late start today. That's because I've had some appointments and some calls going on, so I've had to delay this. I'm going to start getting back into it. So look for 12 o'clock Central Standard Time to do the hot list. And of course, as you guys know, this is now in Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, and Apple Podcasts. So make sure you download this or listen to it in your podcast player of choice. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it. If you guys have questions, please feel free to reach out to me. And again, I'm your host, Matt Johnson with Keller Williams Realty. And I'm happy to answer any questions that I can for you guys. So thank you so much for tuning in, and take care.